Hello, this is Angela with Parkrose Permaculture. About a year ago, I started a sister channel to this channel called Parkrose Hausfrau because I had gotten a lot of requests to talk about kind of the more domestic angle of permaculture, those traditional skills like preserving, baking, what it's like to raise children on a permaculture property, those kind of traditional domestic skills. And they didn't quite weave into this channel. I couldn't quite figure out how to make them sync up. So I thought the best solution is to start a sister channel. And what I've realized over the last year is that that just doesn't work for me in my life. That channel is not yet monetized because YouTube changed the way that they monetize channels. And it's just really hard for me to justify the time to make a video or 2 or 3 videos there every week, knowing that all of that is just volunteer labor. You still have to watch ads. I just don't get any of the ad revenue from it. So what I've decided is that the best use of this platform and the best use of my energy is to meld those channels together. So I've decided that instead of doing a separate Friday upload on that channel every week, I will do a Friday Hausfrau video on Parkrose Permaculture. For me, I just found that there was too much overlap between all parts of my life because right in permaculture, everything is connected. And so it was really hard for me sometimes to decide what is the best place to put this video. It's kind of about homemaking stuff. It's kind of about those traditional, more domestic skills, but it's also absolutely interwoven and connected to permaculture. So there were plenty of times where I couldn't figure out where to put a video because it would have fit on either channel. And that was the biggest message to me, that these 2 channels need to be merged. So that means for now, I am going to be uploading a Friday Hausfrau video. It doesn't mean everything is going to be about like how to scrub your floors and do your laundry, but it is going to be those kinds of permaculture connected subjects that also interweave with the profession of homemaking. Now, whether you're a homemaker or not, you have to tackle domestic skills, particularly in permaculture, where we are thinking about having a closed system and keeping our efforts and our labor on our own property in order to obtain a yield from our property. Most of us are doing all of those domestic skills, be they culinary or be they housekeeping, or be they things like budgeting. We are doing all of those things ourselves. And so they absolutely are integrated with permaculture. So today is my first Friday Parkrose Hausfrau video. And I want to talk today about how the rising cost of food has impacted our family and what we're doing about it. As you'll see in this video, there's a big overlap between permaculture and between things having to do with the household. We know that our home and our family are integrated into our permaculture design. And that means things that impact my professional homemaking also impact my professional permaculture. And I think you'll probably find the same thing is true. So sometimes the solutions to our domestic issues are to be found out in the garden. And sometimes we find that our needs within the home can be met out in our landscape and out in the 12 principles of permaculture. So let's talk about a couple of things I've noticed with the rising cost of food and some of the adjustments our family is making. Now, permaculture has 12 principles. One of those is observe and interact. So I'm really stepping back and I'm looking what's happening to our budget, what's happening to the way we consume food, what's happening in other areas of our home that are kind of a consequence of us facing a really elevated cost of food. So I don't know what it's like where you are, but here in North America, there's a lot of inflation, and obviously everybody is impacted by global crises that are really disrupting the production and distribution of various food goods, be they food goods for people or for livestock. So that has impacted everybody, and in the coming months, it's going to impact everybody even more. I heard on NPR this week that we've seen 5.2% inflation just in the month of March. But food costs have gone up in communities as much as 14%. That is a huge amount. And for our family, we are 6 individuals, plus my dad who lives 1 block away, and I make some of his meals. I have an almost 11-year-old, an almost 14-year-old, a 17-year-old, and a 19-year-old, and then my husband and myself. If you don't know how teenagers eat, it's like that Foxtrot comic where the brother a teenage brother is just consuming like 2 or 3 pizzas. He's just scarfing them down, and the whole rest of the family is like, what happened to all the food? That's what it's like to have 3 teenagers and a preteen in your household. In the last year, the amount of food that our family consumes has skyrocketed. My 13-year-old is 6'2", and in order to invest in his growth and development, his body has seen a huge uptick in his appetite. My eldest child has begun a job that is much more physically taxing, and her appetite has also gone way up. So what we're finding is that without even the rising cost of food, we had to expand our food budget. Now, with the cost of food going up as much as 13 or 14%, we've had to make some serious cutbacks as well. So for our family, it's been a real double whammy. Many of us in the pandemic got much more into growing our own food, and I think we're going to see that increase, which is just another layer of pressure on folks as life gets more unsustainable and more expensive. Well, now you need to source a greater portion of your own food. But there's also some freedom that comes from that, because I know that the food I'm producing in my garden is independent from what is happening in the market. So I'm definitely going to be increasing my production of those calorie crops this year, particularly pumpkins. Last year, I grew a ton of pumpkins. Well, every year I grow a ton of pumpkins. And I find that we eat all of them before the end of winter. And I would love to have more this year to roast and freeze. And so I'm going to be expanding my pumpkin production. So that's number one. I'm going to be increasing those calorie crops in my garden. I'm going to be increasing my production of everything that I can. And I know that may be true for you, but if you are in a position where you just like can't handle any more workload, it's really important when we look at our permaculture design to think about sustainability. And we can have a lot of drive and motivation at the beginning of the year to plant everything in our garden. But if it's not sustainable for us to maintain that garden all the way through the growing season and harvest it and process the harvest, then we're not actually increasing our resilience. So be really careful with your planning. Right now, when you're looking at exploding food budgets, it can be really tempting to just like want to buy all the seeds and all the starts and plant all the things. Just got buzzed by a queen bumblebee so hard. Now, in terms of eggs, I have noticed that our uptick has gone up quite a bit. As my eldest kid can eat like 4 eggs in a sitting easily. So that means we are adding to our poultry flock. And that is something that we are starting to do again next week. We're getting more chicks. We have ducks and chickens, and we eat the eggs from both. And they live a happy, free-range life. They have a rotational poultry paddock system here on our property, and we know that their eggs are produced ethically and that our girls have a really wonderful existence. And so we feel okay about eating a large quantity of eggs. So another thing to think about is building those local food economies, connecting with your local producers. If you are not having to worry about sourcing products from far away, you can buffer yourself quite a bit against inflation, quite a bit against those fluctuations in the cost of fuel and food production. So for me, I'm looking really hard at what local food producers can I support. Again, we are an omnivorous family, but we don't actually eat very much meat to begin with. We buy our meat once a year. We buy a quarter cow, which you'll know is about 150 to 200 pounds, depending on the size of the cow. And that is all of the beef we eat for the whole year. And we have to titrate it and kind of ration it across the year. And that's it. So we eat meat just a couple of times a week. I am not willing to buy factory farmed chicken. Neither are my children, and that means we very rarely eat poultry. In fact, next week we're getting baby turkeys to raise for our Thanksgiving and Christmas dinner because we are not willing to buy confinement poultry at all. And so if we want to follow our permaculture ethics, it means we've got to raise our own poultry that we're going to eat, and we're also not going to eat very much poultry. If you are in a position where you have no choice but to buy factory farmed meat, this is not a judgment against you. We all have to make really hard decisions about how we feed our household, particularly in a really flawed system that we don't necessarily have the power to change. So I don't want you to feel condemned by this video. It's just a really strong stance that my family was wanting to take, particularly my children, that we would rather consume things like beans and lentils and tofu and eggs than to eat chickens that were produced in a really unsustainable and inhumane system. But what other foods can I begin to source locally? So right now that means that I'm hunting for a local producer from which we could potentially buy half a pig. It also means that I am looking to see if there are ways I can support local farmers and perhaps buy some flats of tomatoes for my tomato canning this year. I cannot possibly produce all of the tomatoes I need on site for my sauce and canned tomato needs for the year and frozen tomato needs, but can I support a local farmer here in Portland and source my tomatoes from them? So when we build local food economies, we are building our resilience and we're insulating ourselves really well from that kind of hyperinflation that we're seeing, or dramatic inflation, I should say, since it's not technically hyperinflation. It feels hyper when you are in the midst of examining your budget and the escalating costs of food, but I digress. Okay, so I am looking at expanding what I'm growing and producing in my garden in a way that is sustainable and I can meet the workload. I'm looking at sourcing other foods, other things that I am not able to grow in my own garden. I'm looking at sourcing those locally whenever possible so I can support a resilient food economy here where I am in the Pacific Northwest. The third thing that I'm doing is, as we talked about a moment ago, I'm making some significant alterations in the kinds of foods that we consume. So, like I said, we're eating a lot more beans and lentils. We ate a lot to begin with. We're eating a lot more eggs. But in general, I'm looking for where I can make those substitutions to choose things that are more frugal that our family will enjoy eating. I'm asking our family to consider expanding our palate and trying new foods that we didn't typically eat before that might be more affordable or that we can grow here at home. Now, there's only so much swapping in and out that you can do. So if you're already buying the generic, then you can't save money by switching from the name brand to the generic. It's really a luxury for those of us who had wiggle room in our budget to begin with to afford the kind of more premium items to say, just substitute something else. So I want to recognize that that's not an option that everybody has. So the fourth thing is I'm getting more efficient with the utilization of food that we produce. We have much less kitchen waste. So when it comes to our egg production and wanting to keep our egg production on site, an observation I have made in terms of the budget friendliness and sustainability of our egg production, with the alteration of our dietary choices and our food budget, is that in the past, our chickens have consumed very, very, very little feed because I grow a lot for them. I grow pumpkins, I grow potatoes. When you cook both of those, they make wonderful winter feed, particularly for ducks. We feed them tons of stuff around the property. I also put out logs, you can check out my video, around the property that are kind of little hideouts or traps that collect invertebrates, slugs, and other insects and things like that. And then I flip the logs over. I have them staged around the chicken run, and I flip those logs over, and the poultry feast off of those. The other thing is that all our kitchen scraps tend to go to our birds. So I haven't really stressed in the past when my kids have food that they don't really finish, or when there might be some food waste in our kitchen, because it means that I am cycling those nutrients out of our kitchen. I am producing no waste by feeding them to the chickens who turn them into eggs. With the increase in food costs, we have been much more diligent about eating leftovers, eating every last little bit. We have leftover night where you might just have like a little tiny serving of a whole bunch of different things. Whereas in the past, I might have given that to the birds. Now I see that more as food waste, and I want to make sure that we eat it all up. But the consequence of that has been that I don't have as much in our chicken bucket every morning to give the birds for scraps. And so I'm having to think about that observation and the consequences in that change in our behavior and how that impacts our egg production. And I don't know what that's going to mean, particularly if we're looking at the rising costs of feed. I'm going to have to be a little bit more clever about sourcing my feed if we are more efficiently using up all of the food in our kitchen. Okay, number 5, and I think this one is really critical, is that we think about being more generous. We think about the fact that we want to follow the permaculture ethics. And the third one is to share the surplus. The third one is fair share. And when we're looking at a time of really escalating costs of food, if we're feeling the pinch, other folks are also feeling the pinch. So this is a time when we can practice sharing more with our neighbors, we can practice giving more, and we can practice helping our local community become more resilient by using the permaculture ethic of fair share. I know it can feel really hard when you're already stretched, but when you give out of what you have, you give not only out of your abundance, but you give in a way that is thinking about the fact that other people are walking the same difficult journey you are. There are a lot of dividends for you personally, but there's also dividends for the community. And it forms a much more interconnected community so that when you're struggling, someone will be there to help hold you up as well. So really, I would encourage you to think about the fifth thing that you can do is to give more generously. Think about the fact that a lot more people are going to be facing food insecurity in an environment in which food costs are really going up and up. So thank you for watching today. I hope that you enjoyed this first installment of my Friday Parkrose Hausfrau series. You can check out all my old Parkrose Hausfrau videos over on that YouTube channel. I will leave them up there, and I hope that you get something out of them. If you have suggestions for things about the domestic side of permaculture and you are looking for expertise or for me to share any of my experience in more than 20 years as a homemaker, I would love to hear those comments below. Please check out my Patreon down in the description as well, and I'll be back really soon with another garden video.